Is the system legitimate? That's the important question when people talk about accelerationism or a person like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, I think the problem that a lot of people have with him is he is very much in favor of the status quo. So he's really a follower of the Buckleyite tradition where you just sort of, being a conservative means slow down change. Like, we can still keep changing, we can still keep going in the current direction, we just need to slow it down, we need time to digest these changes. So he's really not advocating any kind of radical departure from the current course of events. When interviewers ask him things like, do you misgender your students? He says, no, absolutely not. I would never misgender a student. I would always call them by their preferred gender. There's nothing wrong with that. And so Jordan Peterson doesn't question transgenderism. He'll just, throw out these, little defenses of free speech and say, well, I personally don't do that. But people should be able to say reprehensible things. People should be allowed to be offensive, which already he's ceded the moral argument. The moral argument is what's important here. So if I'm a leftist and I say something like, well, I hate Nazis and Nazis are reprehensible, but they still have a right to freedom of expression. They still have a right to have public gatherings. They still have a right to demonstrate, to assemble. They have a right to have their own organizations. They have a right to associate with one another. They have a right to be protected by the police. Like, I could go on and talk about all these rights that Nazis have. But if at the end of the day I still call them morally reprehensible, that is what is important. Because the way that people act on a more fundamental level and the way that people think and what the potentiality is for action is much more determined by morality than by abstract political rights. So I can say that you have the right to do something, but that's really meaningless if I say that it's morally abhorrent. The quote-unquote right to any kind of positive freedom, any kind of power, we really have to think in terms of every right that you have, every privilege that you have, every potency that you have is a kind of abstract thing that you own. In the same way you might own a deed to your house, you own the clothing on your back, you have a right to your body, you own your own body. In terms of property, having the freedom of speech is a kind of property that you own. And that's a kind of property that the state in America is supposed to secure for you. And it's supposed to universally allow everyone to have this property called freedom of speech. Now, another property that we're supposed to have is we're supposed to have the democratic vote. Children do not have this property. Another example, felons in some states are not allowed to vote. They don't have this property. So the right to vote, the right to speak, the right to freely assemble, prisoners do not have the right to assemble in the public square. They are confined to a prison cell. So all of these things that the government secures for you in terms of rights, the natural rights, really these are just these are goods. These are goods. And so when we talk about freedom and when we talk about freedom of speech, really what we're talking about here is power, the power to speak. If I say what you say is reprehensible, but you have the right to say it, depending on the context, that might be meaningful or not meaningful. Giving someone the right to speak, if you preface that by saying, and what you're saying is reprehensible, then that's not really saying much. Now, it is saying something. It's saying, there's an objective, in a libertarian sense, you're objectively acquiescing to their right to speak. But in terms of affecting the culture and affecting, the actual social ecosystem or the status of the individual speaking those words they can still lose their job, right? So in a libertarian capitalist economy, or in the American economy, you don't have a right to work. So if I have a bad political opinion and my employer decides they don't like that opinion, they can just fire me. And there's no political protection there. Why did you fire him? Well, he had bad opinions. Okay, I guess he is not entitled to having a job. I guess he can be on welfare then. That is his right, to be on welfare. He does not have a right to have a job. That is that is how things work. In Europe, in France, there are actually political protections. You can't just fire someone for their political opinions. You have to fire them because they harassed someone at work or because they did their job improperly. But you can't fire someone just for their opinions. So when we talk about the right of freedom of speech, or the right to free housing, or the right to free college, or the right to work, the capitalist opinion is that these are all distinct entities. But actually, from the individual perspective, these are really just commodities that we have or we don't have. And so Jordan Peterson goes out and he says, you have the right to misgender someone, even though that's a terrible thing to do and I would never do it. Well, he is acting from the political left then. I mean, and the radical, he is a radical political leftist to say things like, you have the right to misgender someone, but I would never personally do that because that's against my moral code. He has ceded the moral ground to the left, and really that is what matters. Where's your moral ground? If someone says, well, morally, I am to the extreme right, but I respect the freedom of speech of communists. If I say, well, morally, I'm very right-wing, but I respect the freedom of speech of communists, does that make me a classical liberal? Does that make me someone a centrist or something? No. The person is on the right, but they're politically, they think it's politically advantageous to talk about freedom of speech. That's what really matters. What is your moral narrative? What is your moral narrative? And how do you view the legitimacy of the system? Jordan Peterson is this guy who says Western civilization is great. Western civilization has brought more prosperity, happiness, and everything to everyone. And we just need to continue doing that, and all these changes that are happening need to happen more slowly. They need to happen in a more considerate way. They need to be digested, and we just need to be a little more careful in the way that we progress here. He is a progressive. He is a leftist. He is a transsexual. Anyone who believes in transsexual rights, I'm just going to call that person a transsexualist, I guess. He's a transsexualist. He believes in transsexualism as a legitimate alternative lifestyle or identity. And so that's his position, and I think that's why people don't like him, because he's dishonest in presenting himself as a man of the right or even as a centrist when he's obviously not. He's obviously on the radical left, but he presents himself like, oh no, I'm like a moderate right-wing guy. And he's really pushing things in a left-wing direction by saying, hey, I'm going to stand up like the great William F. Buckley, and I'm going to say, hey, we need to slow things down. We need to stop being so collectivist. People need to stop being so anti-white, because the biggest thing that wakes up white people is when you're anti-white. So stop being anti-white. He's saying that not from the perspective of someone who loves white people, wants to save white people. He's saying it from the perspective of an upper-class urbanite, of a Brahmin, of someone who wants to lead the white race to destruction so that some kind of like post-transhumanist thing can come out of that, and he can, be remembered as someone who brought this glorious future forward. And he's saying, look, all this anti-white rhetoric, it's causing fragility in our system. We've got to tone down the anti-white rhetoric, got to tone down the collectivism, make everyone an atomized individual, focus on cleaning your room, forget about the chaos in the streets, forget about the homeless people in the streets, forget about the opiate addicts in the streets, forget about it, just take an Uber from your house to your work. Just get Uber Eats. Just get food delivered to your doorstep. You never have to leave your house. Just have a nice security system. Clean your room, And that's how Jordan Peterson wants people to deal with things, because he likes the system. He thinks the system is legitimate. He wants it to continue as it has. And he doesn't see the need for any major corrections. He's just saying, hey, let's go back to the status quo 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, and let's just go back to a status quo where we can all agree that Martin Luther King was a great individual who judged individuals based on their individuality, and race doesn't matter, and blah, blah, blah. You know, people don't like that because it's disingenuous. And, you know, frankly, Jordan Peterson is a priest. And he's a very bad priest. He's kind of an Old Testament priest. If you read the Old Testament, all the priests and the prophets, they all go to the nation of Israel, and they're like, nation of Israel, you are terrible. You are horrible. You're disgusting. You're a whore. Like, they just take the worst swears that you can find in the Bible, and they just hail them down upon the nation of Israel, and they say the nation of Israel is terrible, it's corrupt, it doesn't follow God's law, it doesn't do anything right. And, you know, this nation's basically a satanic nation. They just say it over and over again. The prophets come again and again and again and say, you guys are doing everything wrong. You're worshiping pagan idols. You're doing all these weird sex practices. You're not respecting the Sabbath. Like, basically everything that you could do wrong in Judaism, they were doing wrong. And the prophets were there to say, hey, nothing is right, and you're all going to be punished for your wickedness. And some people need to stand up and start, like, slaying infidels and bringing justice to the land. This is basically the message that the prophets bring. Now, as a priest, what is Jordan Peterson's message? It's something like, hey, you know, we all need to just calm down and be more civil and go along to get along and be individuals and clean our rooms. So Jordan Peterson is really the opposite of a typical priest. A typical priest is supposed to impel people to action, is supposed to, at least in times of trouble, like we are in a time of trouble. And so the priest who just says, oh, everything's okay, just kind of like go back to work and get your life in order and get married and everything. The priest who just tells you to calm down, someone who tells you to just calm down and that everything's all right, and you can see quite clearly that the world's falling apart, not really a good priestly figure. Really, I mean, is kind of a, I don't know how to say this, but I guess, there would have been times in Europe, during Catholic hegemony or something, that the priest might get up and say, hey, now the Protestants say everything's wrong, but don't worry, we got it under control, everything's just going to be fine. Not really a proper response. The proper response is something like the Jesuits who were quite radical in a lot of their interpretations of Catholicism. Jesuits who did things and who made advances and who explored and just, the Jesuits did a lot of amazing things in the Americas in terms of, basically establishing empires and, establishing universities and economic systems, economies. They did a lot of amazing things, and like Jordan Peterson is like his intended audience is like average, mediocre people, and he wants to find them and tell them that it's okay to be average, it's okay to be mediocre, and it's okay, and like slaying the dragon means like working the 9-to-5 job. And even that metaphor, slaying the dragon, is problematic because the other thing about a true priesthood is that a priesthood is not just speaking to the warrior class, a priesthood is speaking to other prospective priests. And so they're saying, like, look, the world's messed up and we need to fix it, and one of the ways we fix it is by purifying ourselves from the world. And that's not really a job for warriors necessarily. That's really a priestly job. The ascetic, going into the Essenes, going into the wilderness and fasting and doing these purification rituals and, going away from the world is a really priestly activity. Whereas the warrior is someone who's confronting the world, fighting the dragon, right? So just telling people to fight the dragon, clean your room, confront the 9-to-5 job, and accept it, that this is your station in life, It's not really the priestly path. And so Jordan Peterson is definitely a priestly archetype, but he's coming at it very much from the perspective of deception. I mean, the message that he has for his audience is really crafted not to enlighten anyone and not to change anything, but just to make sure that these, stupid idiots don't rock the boat. And everyone can understand the like, even on an implicit level, if you haven't quite nailed it down, everyone can understand the condescension that he has for the people that he's talking to. I mean, he's like a very condescending person. And you get this in interviews, and people think it's funny because he'll do like an interview with a feminist, and the feminist will say, like, what do you have against women's rights? And I'll say, well, I don't have anything against women's rights. What do you have against, my right to be a normal person or a sensible, rational thinker or something? But everyone thinks it's very funny and entertaining when he's condescending to feminists, because then he's BTFOing feminists. That's just his personality. That's just who he is. And that's how he views everyone, not just feminists. That's how he views everyone. And he's this guru. He's very similar to like a Steve Jobs type. The idea that our salvation is just going to come through just continuing the thing as it is. My argument is basically that the system that we're in right now is a transitory system. The system that we are in is not a lasting system. That something has to come out of this system. Now, traditionalists believe that the system is going to revert to an earlier stage, just with updated technology. So we're going to go back to a time when, husbands ruled over their wives with an iron fist, and we're going to go back to a time when we live in an era of homogeneous ethno-states, which, of course, never existed until the 19th century. There was no such thing as a homogeneous ethno-state until the 19th century. It's a total myth. It never existed. As long as there has been a concept of a state, it has always been multi-ethnic in origin and often multiracial. Of course, in Northern Europe is a very racially homogeneous area of the globe for a lot of reasons, including the founder effect, the fact that it was a vastly depopulated area. It was extremely depopulated, really up until the medieval era, when Northern Europe started to explode in population. So you had a very small founding population. We're talking about maybe thousands, tens of thousands of people, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, but very small in population compared to like the Mediterranean. They're a lot less genetic influences, and so much more homogeneous. Exploded in population, very homogeneous, and and so from that perspective, people can say like, oh, well, that's the natural thing, that we just be racially homogeneous. Not necessarily. Certainly not. That's not the case of the Mediterranean history, or that's not the case for Indian history, or for Persian history, or for Mesopotamian history, or Sumerian history. It's not the case for Arabian history. It's not the case for African history when we talk about Egypt or Sudan or any of the big slave trading empires of Africa. They were not racially homogeneous. I mean, Africa is the most racially heterogeneous continent. You have, the people of South Africa, ethnicity, the Xhosa, and I guess there's a click noise at the beginning. I'm not going to make the click noise, but the Nelson Mandela's ethnic tribe, they're very racially distinct from people from the Congo, who are distinct from the Ethiopians, who are distinct from the peoples of West Africa, the Igbo people. There's actually a significant R1, I think it's R1B, R1A or R1B haplogroup presence in Nigeria, in and around Nigeria. And that's racial diversity in Africa. North Africans are very different from sub-Saharan Africans. So the continent of Africa is multiracial. The continent of Asia is multiracial. you have the difference between what we think of the typical Asian being the Northeast Asian, that's your Korean, Chinese, Japanese. Even there are racial differences that you can spot, and if you do, racial classification, skull types and everything. The Ainu people are a different race than the Yamamoto people, or the Yamato people. And then you have, in China, extreme racial diversity between the north with Mongols and the Manchu peoples, and then you have in the south people who are actually Thai peoples, related to the peoples of Thailand who speak a similar language, and as well as Vietnam. And so there's this whole spectrum, all these racial differences. People say, oh, well, the Han Chinese, that is a mono-ethnic group. The Han Chinese extremely homogeneous. They're so genetically homogeneous. They're all descended from Genghis Khan. Well, Genghis Khan was a Mongol, first of all, so that should tip you off to show that, no, the Han Chinese are not racially homogeneous. They are ethnically homogeneous, meaning that they share a common identity, but they're not racially homogeneous. And again, you can take a look at different Chinese people. They don't all look the same. They have very different skull types. There are some Chinese people who are going to have slender skulls, tall skulls. Some Chinese people have very wide. In Europe, we would make a differentiation between like a Mediterranean Nordic skull type versus an Alpine skull type. We have the same skull diversity in China. So you have different brain casings, you have different personality types. You have Chinese people who are described as, oh, well, the Chinese, they're just very keep to themselves, they like to study, they're very quiet, they're orderly. And then other people stereotype the Chinese as, oh, well, the Chinese, they're so loud, they're so rude, they have no manners, no respect whatsoever. And then some people say, oh, well, the Chinese are very peaceful, they would never harm anything, they're not very good at sports, they're not physical people. And then other people would say, well, the Chinese, their history of medicine, it's totally focused on the body, and it's almost like an alchemical tradition. Very humanistic, and furthermore, the Chinese are extremely warlike. Just look at the civil war they had in the 19th century, killed about 30 million people. So, and they didn't even have machine guns back then. They didn't have trench warfare or anything. It was just 30 million people killed the old-fashioned way, Napoleonic style. So, like, again, we can try to stereotype these people and say they're the one way or the other, but actually there's huge disparities. And anytime we're talking about some human population or continent, like this whole concept of like ethnically homogeneous as somehow translating into racially homogeneous, this really what we're talking about here is not being humiliated as white men. You don't need an ethno-state to live in a country where you can be proud to be a white man. I mean, Rhodesia, theoretically, had it not been subject to international sanctions, had it not been, subject to Soviet Union funding the opposition, terrorists, Rhodesia could have very easily survived as a state in which white people could exist, they could prosper, they could multiply, and they could maintain themselves, they could maintain their identity, they could be proud, living in a state which was not homogeneous, which was not mono-ethnic or monoracial. I mean, Rhodesians had all kinds of ethnic, there were Portuguese influence, Dutch influence, English influence, German influence. There were all kinds of European ethnicities, ranging from the Nordic to the Alpine to the Mediterranean, all kinds of white people living in Rhodesia. And it was not... of course, the international situation made that impossible, the continuance of Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. But it's not theoretically impossible. So if we're talking about, we have this grand vision of an ethno-state, and it's not a practical thing, but it's an idealistic future that we can think of and we can look for. What people really want is just not to be humiliated. What people really want is to live in a space where their women are not constantly being stolen from them, and they're not constantly worrying about, the sexual competition between themselves and other races. I don't envy the position of the Asian male in America, because the Asian male in America constantly sees his women being taken by white men and even men of other races. And that is really, on a very primal level, that is something that we're instinctually hardwired to be frustrated by, to be annoyed by, to be irked by, because we know that women have limited reproductive ability, whereas a man can just mate as many times as he wants. A woman has a limited reproductive ability, and so every time she mates with a man not of her race, you're essentially losing a racial cousin there. And so from like this ethnogenetic interest standpoint, or selfish gene theory, that men get very annoyed by this. They get irked by it. They get humiliated by it. It's not a comfortable way to live, to walk around seeing this happening all the time. So, is it possible to live in a state where we don't have to deal with that? Sure. I mean, that was Jim Crow South, right? You wouldn't see that. You wouldn't see white women walking down the street with men of other races. So you don't need a monoethnic state to achieve that. You just need moral permission to say, like, hey, let's be reasonable. Let's live in a state where we can be happy with who we are and advance our own interests. There's no monoethnic precondition for that. The only reason white nationalists even talk about a monoethnic precondition is because they have this whole, left-wing narrative about anti-colonialism and Wilsonian, the Wilsonian concept of self-determination, that every people have its own state, which really was a pragmatic propaganda point. It was aimed against Austria-Hungary. It was the purpose of it was to break up the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to break up the Ottoman Empire. Of course, it was not applied to the British Empire. It was not applied to the French Empire. So the Wilsonian, the utopian idea of Wilson was not utopian at all. It was completely Machiavellian. It was completely cynical. Wilson, if you look at who Wilson was, you look at who's advisors, who were the advisors of Wilson, these people were not looking out for the independence of Czechoslovakia. They didn't care about that. They cared about breaking up the centers of power of Europe to give more power to Britain and France, so that Britain and France could be the vehicles for world domination. They wanted to see a one world government, and they saw Britain and France as steps toward that one world government. And they saw this competition from the Central Powers as slowing down the advance of globalism. That was their opinion. And so in breaking up these multi-ethnic empires like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they saw an easier way. Oh, it's much easier to conquer a state like Czechoslovakia than to conquer a state like Austria-Hungary. It's much easier to take a state like Czechoslovakia and manipulate its central bank to force politicians to do what you want than to manipulate the emperor of Austria-Hungary. Not to say that it wasn't happening. Of course, I think that you can look at Austria-Hungary and Germany, and certainly these states were much more globalist than Russia at the time, and that's why a lot of the bankers supported Germany and Austria-Hungary against Imperial Russia. Now, when Imperial Russia collapsed, all of a sudden the war changed very quickly, and all of a sudden America became involved with the war. That wasn't accidental, that was purposeful. I've jumped around a lot of topics here. I started off with Jordan Peterson. The legitimacy of the system. Is the system legitimate? I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask. If you're having a good time, then I guess the system is legitimate. If you're Jordan Peterson and you're selling your books and everything seems to be going good, then sure, I guess the system is legitimate. You can't argue with feelings. If you feel like everything's going smoothly, if you feel like everything's all right, then you project your feelings outward onto reality, and that basically turns into your assessment of what things are. I guess there was the Alexandria Cortez story. This is kind of, to me, this is a temperature taker for if you think everything is okay. So Sean Hannity, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's radical platform, government-funded universal health care. Okay, I thought we already had that, first of all. Second of all, so what? So what? We either already have it now or we will have it soon. It's not radical at all. The only people it's radical for are boomers, retired boomers who already have government-funded universal health care, and they don't want to have to sacrifice any of their retirement funds. They don't want to sacrifice any part of their riches to pay for the health care of young people. So these people on Medicare and Medicaid, they're already cashing into socialism, and they just don't want to share the benefits of socialism with other people. Ending military airstrikes. Is that a radical platform? I mean, where did George Washington, what were his parting words? When he stepped down from the presidency, did he say, hey, avoid ending military airstrikes? The moment that America ends military airstrikes is the day that America will fall, or something like that. Do military airstrikes benefit you? Maybe if you're a stockholder in like Boeing or some other military industrial complex fund, I guess you would be scared if we're going to end our military airstrikes. If you're a friend of Israel, I guess you would be afraid to end the military airstrikes. But honestly, whether we're bombing brown people in the Middle East or not, doesn't seem to benefit me. Certainly doesn't seem to benefit me either way, because the more we bomb them, the more refugees we get in Europe. And then, Europe, which, if you're of European descent, that is your ancestral homeland, if you care at all about it, you should probably not support bombing the Middle East, because it just produces more refugees that end up flooding into Europe and making the place dirty. What else do we have? Permanent federal assault weapons ban. I think Bill Clinton did that. He had some kind of temporary assault weapons ban. I don't remember the country collapsing at that point. I mean, I do look at countries like the United Kingdom, where guns are not entirely banned. Like, you can have rifles for hunting, but you need a license. It's very strict gun control. I don't know. I guess it's kind of... my feeling on gun control is that if your argument is, if we can just save one child's life by banning guns, why don't you ban child acting? Because certainly there are a huge number of child actors who have been abused. So if banning child acting could save one child's life, a lot of these kids grow up, they overdose on drugs because they were abused in Hollywood. Why don't we ban child acting? You never hear about that. Fundamentally, they don't care about children. What they care about is, disarming white people, because black people have a legal gun. They don't care if it's illegal or not. MS-13 will still have guns. All they care about is disarming law-abiding white people. So I guess that's not cool. But what else do we have? Abolish ICE. I don't know. We still don't have a wall. We still have illegals flooding into the country. Yeah, what is the purpose of ICE, by the way? If we have an open border where anyone can fly into the country and have a baby and it's a U.S. citizen, we have a country where like anyone can come here and they're, we just give them free health care and everything. What's the purpose of ICE? I mean, they say, well, ICE is going to, what are they going to do? They're going to put these people in jail, and then I have to pay to give them free housing in a jail cell and free food while they're in jail. I'm actually not sure that ICE is really doing anything effective. You have all these people in these basically concentration camps, and they're not like doing productive work for the state. They're just sitting there and getting free food and free housing. So I don't know if ICE is actually very effective at this point. Cancellation of Puerto Rico's Wall Street debt. I don't know. It's all like we bailed out the banks, right? Was that radical, Sean Hannity, when we bailed out the banks for billions of dollars? I mean, it's all just money manipulation, quantitative easing, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Who cares, right? Who cares? Is it going to affect my personal life or the average person's financial, their budget or anything like that? 100% free of fossil fuels by 2035. You know, why don't we just stop driving cars? Driving cars kills 30,000 people a year. Never forget. You know, 9/11 killed 3,000 or 4,000, but driving cars kills 30,000 people a year. So let's just stop driving cars. A Green New Deal. Don't know what that is. Probably means more solar panels. I don't know. Fossil fuels are smelly. Furthermore, plastics. Plastics are terrible. We should have a Green New Deal. We should ban plastics. Ban child acting. Ban plastics. Make people stop driving your car. Just walk more. Stop being so fat. That is my radical platform. Government-funded college and trade school. Well, the more we fund, if we make college free, I made a video before and it wasn't that great, but if we make college free, basically college will become worthless, and I think that's a great thing. If we can get homeless black men to get college degrees, we'll basically say that a college degree is worth nothing, and it will just defeat the purpose of the college system, and it will, again, the question is the system legitimate or illegitimate? If the system's legitimate, then you want to go full Jordan Peterson, full David Rubin, full Ben Shapiro, and you want to try to save the system and be a moderate, and like, I'm not pro-Trump, I'm not anti-Trump, I'm going to like work with Trump where I can work with him. You know, you want to go Mitt Romney, try to save the system. But if the system is illegitimate, then, like, I'm not for white nationalism. I'm not, and people, white nationalists, keep coming to me and they're like, why don't you make a positive video? And I'm like, well, if you're a white nationalist, nothing is reality is not positive. The only thing that's positive for a white nationalist is like a Hitler speech or a 70-year-old movie of Nazi troops marching down the street or fighting on the Eastern Front. Like, that is the only thing that is going to make a white nationalist happy. They're not happy with reality because reality has never, except for like a brief period in, you know, the 19th and 20th centuries, reality's never really been a white nationalist reality. Either, again, like Europe was racially white for a while, and then we had colonialism, and when, you know, Europe was racially white, there was no ideological white nationalism keeping it that way. It was just sort of a de facto. No one thought about replacing, until Kalergi, no one thought about replacing the peoples of Europe with another race or something like that. It just wasn't even thought of as possible. There was no anti-whiteness. There was no pro-whiteness. People didn't think in terms of race as in, well, we have a European race, an African race, and things like that. It just wasn't part of the program. There was a concept of race. The aristocrats of Europe certainly thought of themselves as a different race from the commoners of Europe. The Jews of Europe thought of themselves as a different race from the Christians of Europe. So certainly there were ideas of race in Europe, but they didn't correspond to a white nationalist conception of race. Yeah. White nationalists, they have been running around America not accomplishing much. And I think they serve to legitimize the system. I think white nationalists are the boogeyman that the system uses to point out and say, hey, that's the evil Hitler guy over there. And if, you know, you might not like paying your taxes, you might not like transgenderism, you might not like mass immigration, you might not like all these things, but if you delegitimize the system, if you don't do it by the democratic process, you know who's just around the corner? It's Mr. Hitler white nationalist over there. He's going to come to power. He's going to genocide everybody. And so basically I think white nationalists always have been, and this is how George Lincoln Rockwell got to prominence, is he got in front of media cameras just like David Duke and just like others following him. He got in front of the mainstream media and he said, I'm the big bad white nationalist you guys have been talking about. Look at me. Give me press. And the mainstream media was happy to say, yeah, this is the guy we've been warning about you. Don't ever hold a right-wing opinion because you're always going to turn into this big bad guy. And then William F. Buckley comes along and says, no, I'm the right-wing guy who hates David Duke. And the cycle just endlessly continues like that. So I just don't see white nationalists ever being a force for change in America. And that's all I care about is we have an illegitimate system, and I would support anyone who would shake it up. I would support Trump if he would shake it up. I would support Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez if she would shake it up. I would support a Pakistani woman who wants to fund Hezbollah if that would shake it up. I would support anyone who would shake it up. I don't think the system is legitimate. I think it should be destabilized. I think, if you read the Old Testament, it's full of prophets who come to destabilize evil systems. I think we've reached a point of no return. I don't see like a reform coming in. I don't see like a situation where we're like, progressivism is great, but like let's cut down on the trannyism stuff. Like let's stop mutilating boys. Let's stop having these boys commit drug overdose by age 26. Let's like slow down on making people like Mac Miller and the ideology that led him to suicide. Let's stop making him a cultural hero. I don't see any kind of moderate reform coming. It just doesn't seem possible at this point. And so I'm for two things. I'm for what I would call like a pragmatic acceleration, like accelerationism where you can have it. So, for instance, free college, I think, is a great type of accelerationism. On the other hand, you want to maintain your Second Amendment. You want to maintain your First Amendment. If you do not have those two rights, the right of freedom of speech, first of all, I would be shut down. Everything I say is shut down. So I'm not going to support like a Hillary Clinton, or I'm not going to say, we shouldn't have Justice Kavanaugh because he's not accelerationist enough. No, we need to protect the First Amendment. That's like the most important thing. As well as the second. I mean, they're hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. If you don't have the right to bear arms, you don't really have the freedom of speech because the government can shut you down and you have no recourse. If you don't have the freedom of speech, then you have no way to defend your Second Amendment. So they're really interdependent in that way. So that's the point where I guess I'm a conservative, and I'm for maintaining the legitimacy of the First and the Second Amendment. But other than that, everything is totally rotten and corrupt, and I'm in favor of, rather than letting it slowly rot, I just want to say light a match to the culture and let the powder keg explode. And rather than a slow burn and a slow, peaceful death, I say light it up and get people upset and get people polarized, and something has to change in one direction or another. What I can say at least about socialist states, if we're going to talk about socialism doesn't need votes. And so a socialist politician, like let's say Stalin, of course Stalin did do a lot of ethnic resettlement and whatnot, but let's say Khrushchev or someone like that, Khrushchev or Fidel Castro or someone. Like if you're a stable socialist in power, you don't actually need to do ethnic cleansing. Whereas if you're in a democratic state, a representative democracy, then actually there's a huge incentive for politicians to want to bring in the third world to serve as vote fodder. But if you don't need vote fodder, then there's no need for demographic displacement necessarily. So that's an interesting benefit of having a socialist system like living in Belarus or something like that. What else do we have? 70% federal tax rate. I don't know. I mean, young people don't have any savings anyway. Young people are looking at a future where all of the advantages of their boomer forefathers, Medicare, Medicaid is going to be defunded. Like none of the social programs, the New Deal, FDR social programs that the boomer generation had, none of that is going to exist. Immigrants are not going to pay our pensions. The economy, wages are stagnant, productivity, meanwhile, is increasing. So we're reaching a point where we're going to have 30% unemployment, universal basic income. You're going to have enough money to buy McDonald's and update your iPhone every year and play free video games for download with adware online. And like, there's going to be a lot of free entertainment and porn and virtual reality prostitutes. Like, life is going to be good if you're a 300-pound overweight, obese, YouTube, Let's Play, Minecraft, Call of Duty. If that's like your lifestyle, the future is looking bright. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't think savings are the way of the future. I think everyone's going to be in debt. No one will have savings. No one's going to be buying a house. You're going to be renting an apartment in New York. Your landowner, your landlord owner, your landlord will wear very funny clothing, and he's going to evict you if you're 3 minutes late on your rent payment. And like this is sort of the future. This is what's coming, and I don't know. Yeah, let's just have total communist. I mean, remember what happened in Germany? And it was like 1918, 1919. You had communists with guns in the streets trying to take over federal buildings, declaring the Bavarian Socialist Republic. And the result was that, right-wing people started creating their own alternative organizations, and they shut down the socialists, and democracy marginally returned. But that created this situation where people started thinking in terms of like right-wing dictatorships. So I don't know. I think that if you want to change the system, if the system is headed in an illegitimate direction, then you want to create a space really where it's like, yeah, encourage the communists to go full communist. Stop hiding behind social democracy. Just go full communist. I don't care. I mean, it's like when Trump went up to black people and he said to black people, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose by voting Republican? The Democrats haven't changed anything for you. And I say to white people, what do you have to lose? The white nationalists haven't done anything for you in 70 years. White nationalists haven't done anything. They haven't established an ethno-state in, the Pacific Northwest. They have not stopped any law from being changed. They haven't accomplished anything. So obviously, these people are useless. This movement is useless. The system as it is today, even if you get married and you have children, the likely outcome here's what's going to happen if you get married and have children. Unless you are part of an alternative society like the Amish or the Orthodox Jews or like some extreme fundamental Baptists, your life outcome is you're going to get married, and if you're really lucky, you're going to have a couple kids. These kids will then be stolen from you when your wife divorces you. Now, let's say you have the best lawyers in the world, or let's say, by complete accident, your wife dies of natural causes, and you now have custody of the children. What's going to happen to these children who are now you have sole control over the kids? Well, they're going to become transgender, LGBTQ. They're going to grow up and they're going to become single mothers. Your daughter is going to marry someone of another race. Your son's going to marry a woman from Northeast Asia. Like, these are your life outcomes. Or, that's if they're successful, right? If they're unsuccessful, then they become a YouTube Let's Play Minecraft streamer, a Twitch streamer. And if it's a daughter, she's going to have wear, like, cosplay outfits. And your son, he's going to be addicted to pornography, and he's going to overdose on opioids. Like, this is the future. So you're looking at that future. Again, the question is, what do you have to lose? If you're rich, everything I've said is wrong. If you're rich, your kids are going to be normal. They're going to marry within their race. They're going to have kids. Like, things will continue as normal. And that's a completely sustainable situation for you. And so why not? Like, if you're rich, being anti-white is the most rational thing in the world. There is no more rational, pragmatic political opinion I can think of other than being anti-white for rich people. Being anti-white, like, if you're rich, you cannot... It's, like, very comedic, and it's very entertaining to think of yourself as a medieval European aristocrat, and every time you say something anti-white, you're basically spitting on the commoners. Like, this is a well-honed, thousands years long tradition in Europe of white aristocrat people like Bill Gates, people, I mean, you can think of these people, you know, these upper class people where they you know, they don't do, they hate to fraternize, to associate with white working class people. They just hate them. And when they hear about, they like have these jokes about how white people in the South are like, you know, having sex with their cousins, and they just think it's so hilarious, every bad thing, and they construct commercials in the media that just makes fun of white working class people. They have all these inside jokes. They think they're so funny. It's the experience of being a rich white person, an anti-white rich white person, being one of these like Saturday Night Live commentators, like one of the ones who is not Jewish, like a fully Gentile Christian background. I think Conan O'Brien counts in this category. It must be a euphoric experience to wake up every morning and know that if anyone says, I hate white people, you can just say, I hate white people too, with this big grin on your face, and you're just thinking to yourself, yes, I hate the commoners so much. Yes, I hate the working class so much. I can't wait till they all die and I can just replace them with robots, and it's going to be great and awesome. And this is, I think, like, you have Alex Jones, who's now shut down. I guess it's the end of his career for the most part. I guess he's done. He's over. I mean, there are people who have always been doing the Alex Jones thing. I mean, William Pierce ran a successful operation back in the 90s. William Pierce didn't have YouTube. He didn't have Twitter. He didn't have Facebook. He didn't have any social networking. William Pierce had your mailing address if you gave it to him, and he had your phone number if you gave it to him. So if you signed up for the National Alliance like newsletter, he would pre-record these voicemails, and they would like robocall you, and you get to hear like a 20-minute podcast from William Pierce or something on your voicemail. Is how it worked. I mean, seemingly crazy, but this guy was able to get enough donations. He bought like a pretty big ranch somewhere in Virginia. I don't know what I guess one of his crazy followers took over the ranch and went bankrupt, and I think it's being unused land, or it was sold off to pay for some debt for some lawsuit from the SPLC or whatever. But, you know, a lot of people, I guess Alex Jones can survive, but there's this new relative scale. I mean, people who are so insignificant with nothing. You can have like a laptop. They give free laptops away to poor college kids. You know, laptops are not that expensive, and then you get a laptop, and then you go get your $20 camcorder, or whatever they call it, your video recorder, and you can just put out videos very cheaply, and people can get hundreds, even thousands of views or whatever, very cheaply. And so, relatively, I guess Alex Jones has lost a lot of stuff, but Alex Jones was always talking about how he hated the globalists and the elitists, and I think ultimately it's just a class struggle. And the sooner people realize it's a class struggle, I guess the sooner people are going to stop caring about things like capitalism, and they're going to stop caring, like this Sean, I almost said Sean O'Reilly. Oh my god, what's his name? Sean Hannity. Bill Hannity and Sean O'Reilly, the two Irish Catholic conservatives. Like that's who you get. You get on the one hand you get Sean O'Reilly and Bill O'Hannity, and then you also have that's your one variety of conservative that's allowed, and then you have your Bill Kristol, your Ben Shapiro, your Dennis Prager type. So there's like very limited types of conservative that you're allowed to be. But you know, the sooner people can drop this libertarian capitalist, like, we must defend the boomer retirement fund, we must defend it from the socialists, like, the sooner people can drop that and just understand that you're either part of the ruling class who is having a fantastic time and the future looks immensely bright, and it's just a beautiful time to be alive if you're rich, or you're not part of the rich and life is not that great. And then there's kind of people who have reached some certain level of hedonism where they're totally cool with their lower class status. They're like, yeah, I'm not rich, but that's okay because I have my Let's Play series, I have my Twitch stream, I have my porn collection, I have transgenderism, I have my identity politics, I'm a trans person, and so I'm happy to work at Walmart or be a corporate slave because Walmart endorses the rainbow flag and therefore everything is okay. So it's kind of like a sandwich where you have rich people have beautiful lives filled with happiness, and then you have this like lumpen proletariat full of like trans people and Twitch streamers and people who are just totally on board with the hedonic capitalists, like just sell your body, just become a cam girl, just sell your body to make money, do whatever you can to make money, and that's the way to go. And then you have people who are kind of in the middle who are like, well, I'm not rich and I haven't totally sacrificed every ounce of my dignity. Like, sure, I'm humiliated on a daily basis because I have to use someone's preferred pronouns, or I have to watch like gremlins walking down the street who live off my tax money, or there's just so many examples of just a passive humiliation when you walk down the street and a homeless man accosts you because you're privileged or whatever. Like, there's so many examples of just passive where you're not doing anything, you're not even trying, you're trying to ignore the constant humiliation that's being pushed upon you by the media, and yet it is people are like aggressively trying to humiliate you as you try to go about your day and just ignore the constant moral oppression from the top down. And all their like little Antifa servants are gnawing at your ankles, and you're in this middle space where, again, you're not a complete failure in life, but you're not successful enough to be jovially anti-white, and so it's a very uncomfortable space to be in. And when you're in that space, when you're not on the government dole, when you're not on the welfare dole, like when you're being financed by the government, then you're like, oh, I really hope the government keeps going. Like, you're really pro-government, really Democrat. Like, poor white people, I'm sad to say, poor white people are still very much in the Democrat camp. Like, poor white people. Now, white men without college degrees are pretty pro-Trump. But if you look at poor white women, especially single moms, white single moms, poor white single moms, these people are extremely left-wing, extremely pro-Democrat. Sure, white men without college degrees, white men who work manual labor, construction, whatever, these guys are pro-Trump, but there's not actually a whole lot of them as a demographic, and they're really outnumbered by other kinds of poor white people. And, so these people who are on the government dole, who are dependent on the government, they really like the status quo, and anything that the media puts out, they totally they love that kind of pop country that has the like rap interlude. They like country music that has like a 30-second rap interlude. That's the kind of culture they consume, and so they're really into that. And they love the government, they love the mainstream media, they love the status quo. They post stuff to Facebook like, I hate people who are judgmental, which is the most. It blows my mind to this day, because it's such a complex ideological statement. When you say I hate people who are judgmental, you're basically saying, please kill Western civilization. Oh, Satan, just come down and just bring hell upon the earth, is basically you're crying out. It's a very esoteric statement. It's like, as beloved, so below. I hate judgmental people. They don't even understand how deep the statement is, and it's so frequently parroted. And then you have, so you have these classes, like the very bottom and the very top and the people in the middle. And it's only the people in the middle who think the system is illegitimate. Everyone who's a parasite and everyone who is, well, there's parasites on the top. Like, so a banker is a parasite. And a single mom on welfare is a parasite. There are two types of parasites. One is just parasitism from the top, and one is parasitism from the bottom. But everyone who's not a parasite basically has been brainwashed into thinking that it gets better, something's going to be better tomorrow, the system's going to become legitimate, we can reform it, things are going to get better, and you just got to keep living the American dream, and things are going to get better. We have to just protect the boomers' retirement funds, and it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyone, and look, the problem I have with white nationalists, if white nationalists, I don't care. Like, nothing offends me at this point. I don't care what their rhetoric is. I don't care how offensive or trollish they are. If they were actually producing results, I would have no problem with them. The problem is these people aren't producing results. They are, more interested in fighting each other than fighting the culture at large. They're constantly embroiled in these moral dramas and the interrelational dramas, and these people are friends but now they're enemies, and this person has their own camp and that person has that camp, and they're so factional because that's what their mind is. In their mind, they're we are the white nationalist empire, and today the Celtic legions are they're in this mind space where everything they do is so very important, and therefore every kind of insult or slight or disrespectful tone that anyone takes, they take it so personally, and it becomes so they're just these people who are extremely narcissistic. They think their movement's so important, and that anything that happens, it is the world. It's a world-shattering event, and they can never get over it. They can never get over a grudge. So it's just constant interpersonal drama. I don't care. I don't care what is happening in people's personal lives. I don't care about people's personal lives. I care about what unites us in the fact that we are non-parasitic peoples, or we don't want to be parasitic peoples, and we don't think the system is legitimate. And I would support anyone on the far left or the far right, or a radical populist or a radical centrist. I would support anyone who would shake up the system or destabilize the system or bring us closer to a day where we have some kind of hope that we're not going to live under the system. Now, I have offered before, I've said if this system continues, eventually it's a transitory system, and so eventually it's going to result in killer artificial intelligence robots or genetically modified humans who are going to wipe out the rest of us, either metaphorically or physically. It's going to be some kind of, transhuman event, some kind of singularity event. That has to happen, or the traditionalists are right. We're going to go back to medieval era morality, except we're going to have updated technology, or there's some kind of alternative to that. But the system as it is cannot continue, and personally, I would like to see progress made toward delegitimizing the system in my lifetime. So whatever, and I do that through critique. I'm not here to offer something positive because I'm not so concerned with what the outcome is. I'm not looking for an ethno-state. I'm not looking for a traditional Christian monarchy. I'm not looking for a democratic republic. I'm not looking for a Marxist-Leninist communist state. I don't have any ideal in my mind of some perfect utopia that would we could all rally and unite around. That's not... I don't think any of that's realistic. I mean, I guess if that motivates someone, then I'll let them, if that fantasy keeps them going and helps them destabilize the system. I'm not necessarily devoting my energies to attacking that. But more often than not, I feel like those people who are utopian and think that something great and beautiful is around the corner, these people are more interested in fighting other utopian visions. They're like, well, I'm a Marxist-Leninist and I hate the fascists. And a fascist is like, well, I'm a fascist and I hate the Marxist-Leninists. And I'm like, hey, yo, guys, no matter how much, the Antifa fights the TWP, and I know they're defunct, but I'm just saying, no matter how much the far left and the far right fight each other and beat each other up, that's not going to change the fact that the system thwarts both of you. And so if both the far left and the far right stopped fighting each other and they started fighting the system itself, they'd both have a greater chance of creating a destabilization effect that would allow either of them to have a fighting chance to actually enact their utopian views for society. Now, if either of those would actually be successful is a different question, but wouldn't you have a better chance? And so, and you can see there were periods in Weimar Germany where there were issues, and it's hard to imagine today, but there were certain issues concerning, laws about censorship and political extremism and certain things, freedom of assembly, that both communists and National Socialists were united on. They said, look, we don't like this democratic system. We don't like the oppression of the state. We want an alternative. So even though they did fight each other a lot of the time, they still understood there were things that they could agree upon. So, again, I'm not really concerned on what the outcome is. I just don't see I don't want to even use the term middle class. I want to say non-parasitic white people. I don't see a future. I see the future as you either become a parasite or you die. And I don't like that future, and so I am open to any change. I am open to a change toward, if we're going to have extreme accelerationism on the left, extreme accelerationism on the right, the only things I care about at this point are having an armed citizenry, because I think the armed citizenry puts power in the hands of a non-parasitic class. That's why I like the concept of an armed citizenry, because having people on welfare don't need guns, and rich people don't need guns. They just hire security for that, which is always legal in every gun control state. So, I'm not in favor of the state having all the guns and the people having none of the guns. I'm in favor, actually, of the state having none of the guns, the people having all the guns, at least in the current situation. Now, of course, if I was dictator and I was trying to come up with a scenario of how I would keep control, of course, I would, see the benefits of gun control for the purpose of maintaining power. But, no, I am heavily in favor of everyone having legal access to guns, and I guess the argument is like, oh, well, if we allow people to have access to really scary guns, like machine guns, then there would just be constant, massacres all the time, and it would be very scary. And I don't know, again, I'm not a materialist, so if you tell me, oh, there was an Ariana Grande concert and a Muslim terrorist just blew it up, should we deport all the Muslims? I'd say, no, we should probably import more Muslims, actually, because these Muslims, they seem to, while I don't agree with their actions, of course, always condemn violence, however, even though it's not right what they did, I understand why they did what they did, because if my daughter was 14 years old and she told me she wants to go to an Ariana Grande concert, and then on the other hand there's a Muslim who's like, hey, I'm going to blow up that concert, I'd be like, legally I'm obligated that I have to report you to the police, but, before I send you to jail, I just want to let you know, what you're doing is not right, but I understand kind of the morality there, because I think, I would never convert to Islam. I would never recommend anyone convert to Islam, because it is a slave religion. the people, like, Islam is a force which is not controlled by Muslims. Every time you hear about a radical Muslim does some radical Muslim thing, like ISIS is a perfect example. ISIS was a proxy state of Israel. Israel supported ISIS in every possible way that they could. The United States supported ISIS in every possible way it could. Al-Qaeda was a creation of Mossad and the CIA. Like, these quote-unquote radical Muslims. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia, the most radical Muslim state in the world. The Saudi monarchy is a total creation of the British Empire, American Empire, and the Israelis. So Saudi Arabia is a total Anglo-Zionist creation. There is no autonomy of Muslim peoples. Islam means submission, and it doesn't mean submission to Allah. It means submission to Anglo-Zionist imperialism. That's all Islam means. The people who want freedom from Anglo-Zionist imperialism, people like Bashar al-Assad, people like Saddam Hussein, people like Muammar Gaddafi, these people are secular, or in the case of Bashar al-Assad, he's an Alawite. He's like this esoteric, like, hey guys, we're Muslim, wink wink. You know, yeah, we're told, don't kill us, we're Muslim too. They are not Muslim. Anyone who is a Muslim is a slave to Anglo-Zionism. I mean, this is like an ancient thing. Like, when Muhammad started Islam, this is the way that Islam was. Islam is this very exoteric, explicit ideology detailing everything you should do in life. There's nothing left to chance. Why? Because the text of the Quran is meant to be dictated to slaves. Islam is a slave religion for slave peoples. And so if you join Islam, you're becoming a slave, not to the imams, not to the radical mullahs. You're becoming a slave to the people who control Islam, who have always been non-Muslims. The people who have always led Muslims around, like the Ottoman Empire was not controlled by the Muslims. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was not a Muslim. These people were always crypto something or other. They were certainly not Muslims. They never believed in Islam. They never believed in the tenets of Islam. You know, they were always some kind of weird Sufi sect or an Alawite or something completely not Muslim. And you can look that up yourself, but none of the people who ever run Islam, everyone who claims to be fighting for Islam is a puppet of some non-Islamic entity. So if someone says, oh, well, maybe we should just join Islam, that's like saying, oh, well, in order to fight Coca-Cola, we should, like, join the Pepsi Corporation or something when, or you know, Coca-Cola owns all these subsidiary companies. So, like, you're joining a subsidiary of the thing you're trying to fight is not very smart. Trying to fight the global order by joining a tool of the global order is not very smart. So, no, Islam is not an actual resistance movement. But, of course, I prefer Muslim immigration to any other kind of immigration because Muslims make every effort to show themselves to be different. And they make every effort to constantly blow themselves up and present themselves as terrorists. Like, no other people does this. Like, if we had 300 million Chinese people immigrate to the United States, they would not be committing terrorist bombings. They would not even be committing crimes at a very high rate. They would probably commit crimes at a lower rate than white people. That wouldn't be preferable, in my opinion. It'd be much more preferable to have, like, 1 million Muslims immigrate and they start committing all kinds of beheadings and things like that, because it's not the thing itself, it's the perception of the thing that matters. And so people think, oh, well, you know, 1 million Chinese immigrate, that's no problem. They assimilate, they're good immigrants, even though they vote Democrat, even though they vote for open borders, even though they vote for white dispossession. You know, Chinese, they're model migrants, they're model minorities. Whereas Muslims, everyone just sees them for what they are because they are so tactless. They are so, they just have no concept. Everyone talks about taqiyya, like, oh, Muslims are always lying about the faith. No, they're just, like, so blunt and forward, and they have no concept of, like, hey, guys, maybe we should be more subversive, or maybe we should be more tactful or anything. Like, they're very stupid. Now, some of them are trying to wise up, like the Muslim feminists, I would say, are a good example of Muslims who are doing it right in terms of how you subvert a host nation. Like, you want to be a Muslim feminist is the right way to go. But, you know, a lot of these Muslims, they just have no clue what's going on. Very strange religion. So I don't advocate joining Islam. It's a mess. Islam is a mess. It's a total mess. Don't join Islam. But, like, I understand, I guess, getting to the original point about guns and violence and things like that. When I hear, someone has blown up a bomb, a Muslim has blown up a bomb at an Ariana Grande concert, my first thought isn't like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Think about the parents of those children. Think about how sad those parents are. Because if you've sent your child to an Ariana Grande concert, then you are already a bad parent, and I hope you feel sad, because you should feel sad. You should be punished for your actions. You know, and do I think, oh, how sad those children are no longer on the earth to, you know, experience the wonderful joys of reality, such as going to an Ariana Grande concert. No, I don't think about that either. So I don't think it's sad that their souls have left the physical plane. I don't think it's sad that these parents have lost their children, because as far as I'm concerned, the parents deserve any kind of sadness that comes to them. And those children, their souls are probably better off somewhere else. They're certainly not better off here, where they're indulging in the culture of Ariana Grande. You know, the Kabbalist, you know, the Kabbalah lover Ariana Grande, they're certainly not better off listening to Ariana Grande. They're certainly better off wherever they are. I don't know where they are. I don't know where their soul is going to end up. But it's certainly not better off where it is. You know, so I don't advocate that. I don't think that an individual is going to benefit from doing that sort of thing. And violence, I mean, the first duty of the state, before propaganda, before it establishes its morality, before everything, the state, it deals with matters of violence. So it's never productive to engage, like to say something like, oh, we're going to free these poor degenerate souls by engaging in violence. You can always engage better. There's always something more productive to do than violence. You can always critique. I mean, I guess it's a distinction between like a priestly outlook and a warrior outlook. The warrior looks at every problem as a problem that can be solved with violence, essentially. Whereas the priest does not necessarily look at everything in that way. So, I don't know. I've said a lot of things. I hope some of it made sense. I don't know what the name of this video is. There were a lot of ideas. The problem here is I just go around so many different things, and I'm like, fine. I'm fine with. To me, it's a pragmatic question. It's a question of, when we talk about politics, when people say something like, well, what's your pragmatic solution? I'm like, well, I don't know, because conditions are changing all the time. Everything's constantly changing, and so I don't know what the pragmatic solution. Obviously, if there was a pragmatic solution that had already presented itself, then it would have already succeeded. So whatever the pragmatic solution is has not yet arrived, and I don't think I'm going to be the one to discover it. I think someone else has to discover it, and hopefully I can recognize that person for their genius and jump on board with them and collaborate and support that person. That's my hope. I think that would be a beautiful invention. Someone can come up with like some kind of ideological or religious system that's going to upset the status quo. But I'm very much open to experimenting with different ideas or different things. Not saying I want to lie. I'm just saying, like, that libertarianism is this internally consistent system. Marxist-Leninism, you could say, is internally consistent. Like, you can read some Marxist tract, an orthodox Marxist tract, and you can say, well, according to these principles of Marxism, then this follows, and that follows, and the other thing follows. Or you can say, according to these principles of libertarianism, then, you know, such and such and such follows. However, the question of whether Marxism is true or Lenin or libertarianism is true, that's not coherent to me. That's not coherent. That question is not coherent unless you're referencing reality, and therefore it's a question of pragmatics. So you know, libertarianism makes presumptions. It has premises, and things follow from those premises, a prescribed course of action. And so my question is, well, are the premises and axioms, do they correspond with reality? In some cases they might, in some cases they might not. In other cases it might be 50% true, 50% false. So if a premise of libertarianism is something like, you know, we can have like mutually beneficial trade, I would say, yeah, sure, there are examples where we can trade with one another and it's mutually beneficiarity. If people are acting in good faith, for example, if you have grain and I have cattle, and we make a trade, and we're both you know, honest and fair in our dealings, then that can be mutually beneficial. If a banker or a money manipulator is going towards someone with a predatory loan and they're saying, here, I'm going to offer you this really cheap loan, it's really good, and the person says, I don't know, I have really bad credit, and they say, oh, don't worry about your credit, we're going to get you this loan, it's a great loan. That predatory lending practice is not done in good faith, and therefore I don't think libertarianism is really a good model to be working off of. And depending on the cultural and identitarian context of the population at hand, you could have a situation where libertarianism works very well, it works moderately well, it works somewhat well, or it works poorly, or it's disastrous. And on the other hand, we can talk about Marxist-Leninism. We can say, well, you know, really we should have a system in which everything is controlled by political commissars, and they control the factories, and they dictate how society goes. And I would say, well, if you have a society in which the political commissars care about the average person, then that might work out okay. So, for instance, an ethnically homogeneous East German state with a history of a concept of civic duty, that might work. It might work to have a Marxist-Leninist East German state. And the Marxist-Leninist East German state actually did quite well. There was no mass starvation. There was no huge gulag system. Yes, there was political repression. Yes, there was the Stasi. I'm not saying it was perfect, but I'm saying that Marxist-Leninism is going to be worse in Ethiopia and better in East Germany. So a political system will fare better or worse depending on the conditions of that time and place and the people to whom it is applied. And that's all I'm saying with any of this political stuff, is I'm not wedded to like some political ideology. That's not my ethnicity. That's not my identity. My ethnicity is not I'm an American conservative, and whatever the conservative movement says is my doctrine, and I'm going to follow to the day I die. I'm not a radical traditionalist. I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not any of these labels, because I don't find that helpful in destabilizing the system. I don't think painting a big target around myself and saying this is who I am, this is how to identify me, this is how to defeat me by my own principles, I don't think that's productive. I think the best way to bring down a system is to be amorphous and to be really like indescribable, to be like water. I mean, that's what Bruce Lee says, be like water. I'm sure Sun Tzu says the similar thing. You want to be like water. When someone attacks you, and of course this is what all good subversive movements do, and I view myself first and foremost, I guess, as a subversive, is that if someone attacks you and says, well, you guys, all you care about is race, and you're just racialists, and you're just so racist all the time. You say, well, that's not what I get up in the morning. I just think about race all the time. That's not my main preoccupation. I'm not making videos about racial classification. I'm not constantly talking about that. That's not my main thesis. And I'm perfectly willing to talk about things other than race, and I'm not monomaniacally obsessed with race. So you can attack me as racist all day, and I'm not going to start saying, yeah, race is the only thing that matters. We're gonna have a pure white ethno state. Only white people are gonna be let in. It's 99% Bavarian phenotype. So I'm not gonna say I'm a true American conservative or a true American patriot. And then someone says, oh, yeah, well, what do you think about Russian interference in our elections? How can you be a true American patriot if you're not? It's like, well, I don't care if the Russians want to influence us. Then I'll have to judge whether that influence is good or bad. I think we have a lot that we could learn from foreign cultures, right? So if you set yourself up in this narrative, then you set yourself up, you basically put yourself in a position where someone can just defeat you with your own principles. And I'm not looking to be defeated by my own principles. I'm looking to explore the contradictions in the system as it is. So it's not so much setting myself up as a person who is defined by his principles, as what he thinks is positive and what's good and what he wants to force on everybody else. But it's more defined by what we have going on here is something that's pretty messed up, and let's critique it. A culture of critique. I'm trying to establish a culture of critique of the current system. And in order to establish that, if you look at how other people established a culture of critique, they weren't 100% on the left. That's completely wrong to say that people who created the modern world were all on the left. No, some of them were on the right. Some of them were friendly to the aristocracy. Some of them were part of the Buckleyite conservative movement. Some of them are neoconservatives. So there were all kinds of different subversives who occupied every station of society, every part of the political spectrum. They were not all concentrated on the left. So that's my vision, is that you don't just concentrate yourself into like one side of the political spectrum or one narrative, and you just constantly purity spiral about who's more libertarian, who's more white nationalist, who's more conservative. And it just becomes this really insular, ghettoized thing. So instead of constantly trying to hold yourself up to some pure political standard, you care more about delegitimizing the system from every angle and being tolerant. And I would love to talk to leftists. If a leftist would like to be my friend and talk to me, I would be so happy to engage with that. I would be so, and I have before, and I would do it again. I would be overjoyed to do that. And I think that's how people should view themselves, is not to be and of course there are lines that I have moral principles. Those are different from political principles at the end of the day. A moral principle, like, if you're a woman who takes her son and you tell your son that he's a girl because, well, the term girl was actually an androgynous term for both boys and females below a certain age. It just meant child. If you tell an androgynous, because all children are androgynous to an extent, they haven't fully developed their sexual features, and so if you tell a child of any gender that oh, you must be the opposite gender because you're somewhat androgynous, then I think you're a child abuser, and I don't really want anything to do with you, and I wish you the worst. But if you're someone who just has a different economic theory or something, yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that a political opposition movement is going to be a lot healthier, a lot more productive when it's a lot more friendlier with political dissidents of any stripe, and it practices enmity toward defenders of the system. The reason why I don't like Antifa is because they're constantly defending the morality of corporate America. That's why I don't like Antifa. It's not because they're true dissidents. If Antifa started blowing up federal buildings, I would say, okay, that's terrorism. I disavow. It's not right, but I understand. I would say, you know what? We should at least understand why these Antifa are blowing up federal buildings. Certainly it's not right, but what sort of injustices led them to these acts? That's the real question we should be asking. But of course, Antifa is never going to do that. Antifa is just going to attack Patriot Prayer and milquetoast conservatives and Milo and Jordan Peterson types. So now we're going to end the video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. See ya again next time. Bye-bye.